Please welcome Stephen Olson.
I used to watch this television show on PBS. It's not on anymore. It was called Connections, and it talked about history. But it presented history not just as dates and people's names. It talked about events and how one event led to another event. One of the stories I remember was about, it connected the French Revolution to the laying of the transcontinental communication line from Europe to the United States. And after watching that show, I began to think, well, I wonder, does it really have to be about history? Could it be about something personal? And I started thinking about, some of the events in my life. And one of the things that I began to think about had to do with my sister-in-law, who moved from New York to Arizona to study social working. She completed her undergraduate degree and then moved from Arizona to LA, where she became involved with the Tri-Counties Regional Center in Los Angeles. And the Tri-Counties Regional Center is an agency that decides where the money is going to go to individuals and other agencies who provide services for those with disability. Now, during this course of her going from Arizona to LA, her father also moved from New York to LA, where he met his second wife. They eventually got married. His second wife had 3 older daughters. One of the daughters had a young son who was born with autism. And they had been fighting with Regional Center to get him services and were being denied. So my sister-in-law stepped in and got the service that he required. And that kind of makes me think is, it wasn't a one thing shot. It wasn't just this one thing that just developed by itself. It came from a series of events. One was my sister-in-law moving from New York to Arizona, studying to be a social worker, then moving to LA for her master's, getting involved with Regional Center, where she had the knowledge and skill to go in there and demand the services that this young boy needed. But it goes back further than that, because my father-in-law never would have had a second wife had not his first wife died of cancer. And that's a really tragic event, but you have to think about it. If that didn't happen, he never would have met his second wife. He never would have gotten involved with someone who needed help to get service. And then you have to think, it goes back further than that. Because my father-in-law had been living in Los Angeles when his father decided he needed help in his bathing suit factory that he was running in New York. My father-in-law went to New York, eventually took over the bathing suit factory. While he was there, didn't have any friends or other family there, was very lonely, and decided on Valentine's Day night to go on a cruise on the Hudson River, where he meets a woman who's visiting from Canada, whose sisters had convinced to go on that cruise. They met, eventually got married, had 2 kids. One who left New York, went to Arizona, became a social worker, moved to LA, got involved with a family who needed social work services, and was able to get the service that this person who had autism needed the service. But it goes back further than that. Because then you have to think about the grandfather. The grandfather had moved to the United States from Poland. And when he got to the United States, one of the first things he did in order to earn money was he would carry a Singer sewing machine on his shoulder and go about the neighborhood repairing people's clothing and doing mending that they needed. Eventually, he got a job working for a business that did sewing. While he's in New York, he meets his wife. They decide to get married. They go off on a honeymoon. When they come back, the grandfather's employer fires him for leaving the job. When the grandfather comes home, he says to his wife, "I am never going to work for another man again." He actually developed a way of manufacturing wedding veils so that they could be produced automatically faster and cheaper. And that's how he built his business, and eventually evolved it into a bathing suit factory, which eventually my father-in-law took over, and eventually met his first wife because they decided to go on a cruise on the Hudson River. They had 2 daughters. One of the daughters moves to Arizona to study social worker, moves to LA, and helps a young man get the services that he needed. So then you have to think, it goes back further than that. Because why would a young man move to the United States with nothing but a sewing machine on his shoulder? If it had not been for another man who decided he was going to take over the world and exterminate all the Jews, that grandfather never would have left his country, never would have gone to America, never would have started a bathing suit factory, never would have gotten married to the woman he met in the United States, never would have had the man who became my father-in-law, who had 2 daughters, one daughter who moved to Arizona to become a social worker, then moved to LA, and helped another family get the services that they needed for their young son. And the most thing I can take away from this is that no matter what we do, no matter what action we do, it affects somebody. And it may not affect somebody that you know. It may not even affect somebody that you're ever going to know. It may not affect somebody until after your death. But it will affect somebody. And I think the most positive thing you can take away from that is no matter how you feel, we are all connected and we are never alone.